Today we're going to talk about graphing, but just the basics. We're going to talk first about why do we graph. Don't write down this yet. You can pause the video later and write everything in your notes. So the reason we graph is we're going to take a data table So this is a data table. And we're going to change that into a graph. Now, why do we do this? When you just have a long list of numbers, it's really hard to see what's going on. But when it's in a picture, it's much easier to see a pattern. So I want you to go ahead and pause the video and write this in your notebook. Ready? Pause it now. Did you really pause it and write it? If you did, keep watching. If you didn't, really pause it, and yes, you do. You have to write this down in your notebook. So your next question is, but how do I do this? We start off with a data table that we collect maybe from making different measurements, like we did in our last unit. Now, we're going to draw our graph. Before we draw our graph, we're going to take a math break. We're going to talk about the reason that I drew this shape. So in math, we use the Cartesian coordinates to show different numbers. So in the middle is 0, 0. To the right are the positive numbers. Up are also positive numbers. Left of the origin are negative numbers. And down are also negative numbers. Most of the time in science, at least in this class, your numbers in your data table are going to be positive. So we are just going to use this quadrant up here. Okay, so if we look at our numbers, they're all positive. So I'm just going to use this piece of the graph, and that's why I drew that L. This has been your math break. When we graph, we have to put things in very specific spots. Down on the x-axis, we're going to put the independent variable. The independent variable is also referred to as IV. The independent variable is what I change, or what I manipulate. The way I remember this is, it's what I change, and it's the independent variable. So I change the IV. And the IV goes on the x-axis. Now in our data table, to figure out which one is the IV, I look at the data, and it's the one that I changed. Okay, so whichever one I'm changing in the experiment, that's the IV. Now usually in a data table, people work from left to right, and so if it's the one I'm changing, if I change it, then I'm going to probably write it on the left. I'm going to write it first because I have control over it. So the IV, not always, but is usually on the left side of the data table. Not always, but most of the time. Now on the y-axis, we put the dependent variable, also known as the dv. The dependent variable, we're trying to see if it might depend on the independent variable. So the dependent variable might depend or respond to the IV. The dependent variable goes on the y-axis. And since we're going to see what's happening, we don't really know. Usually in a data table, it will go on the right side. Not always, but most of the time the dependent variable is on the right side of a data table. Now our graph needs one more thing. So people will know what it's about, it needs a title. Now for our graph, we always write the title pretty much the same way. So I'm going to write the effect of the IV on the dV. So whenever I go to make a graph, I write the effect of, and then I fill in the IV, and then I write on, and then I fill in what the dV says. And that's how I'm going to make my graph. So let's practice making a graph. First, I need to collect some data. Maybe I'm going to collect how many hours I work. I'm going to say work, and that's going to be in hours. And I'm going to see how that might affect my pay. And that's going to be in dollar bills. Okay, so I go to work the first day, but I only work for 4 hours. Okay, so now we're going to graph this. So the first thing I'm going to do is draw my big L. Well, that'll have to be perfectly straight, but take your time and draw them nice and neat. Then the next thing I always do is I write the title, because I know that is the thing I forget all the time. And so since I know I forget it, I always do it first. That way it'll just already be on there. So now if you remember, it's the effect of the IV on pay. ELA break. Affect versus effect. Affect is usually a verb, and effect is usually a noun. Not all the time, but most of the time. Affect means to act or to change something. Effect is a noun, and it's the result or consequence. It's the thing that happened. Okay? A noun is a person, place, or thing. So it's the thing that happened. Okay? Anytime you're using the word result, you could change it to the word effect. So the affect is Mr. McPheeters pushes on the canoe. The effect is the thing that happens, Mr. McPheeters falls. So the thing that happened was I fell. This is the end of your ELA break. Now I need to label. I always do the x-axis next. So all I do is I remember that my IV is usually on the left, but I can also look, I have control over how many hours I work. Okay, so I controlled how many hours I worked each day. So I'm going to write work, and then I've got to make sure to put my units, which is hours. Leave a gap, we're going to have to write some numbers in here. Okay, and then I'm going to label my y-axis. So that's my dependent variable. So I'm trying to see is how my hours worked, will they affect how much I'm going to get paid? Make sure you leave that gap for the numbers. Okay, so I did all that without any of the numbers. Okay, so now we're going to look at the numbers. So hours worked, looks like my biggest number is 8. And so I think I could probably go by ones and get up to 8 and be just fine. So you always want to go up by even intervals, okay, by even amounts. So I'm going to go up by ones. So right here is 0. That's like my origin. I'm going to go one more than my last data point. And so now I'm going to write those in there. The marks are evenly spaced, and the numbers go up by the same amount each time. They go up by 1. And they take up most of the space. They're not all scrunched to one side. Next, I'm going to look at my money I got paid. So it goes up to 82. That's a pretty high number. So I'm going to go up by tens. Okay, so I'm going to make everyone go up by tens. So evenly spaced marks. Now I'm going to go up by tens. Okay, so I went up by tens. Even though I've got this 82, I didn't write 82, I went 80 and 90, because I'm going up by tens. It always stays the same amount. Now last, I'm going to plot my points. Okay, so I know that this is the x, so I'm going to go 4, and then I got to go up to 40 and see where they meet. So I'm going to go from 4 up until I get about where 40 is. I'm going to put a dot. I'm going to go 6 to 60. So on 8 to 82. This is where that estimation part comes in. I know this is around 80, and so I'm going to go up just a little bit and make a dot. Now I'm going to go ahead and connect those dots. I'm not connecting it to 0. Do not connect it to 0. That's my entire graph. Social studies break. So on maps, they also use Cartesian coordinates, only this is longitude and latitude. So latitude lays flat, it's like flatitude. And then longitude, it goes up and down, it's really long. Okay, but we use these just like a graph. So if I want to know where this spot is right here, okay, my latitude would be 43 degrees north and 85 degrees west, and then that would get me to that point right here. Just like on our graph when I went over 4 and up to 40. And so we can use latitude and longitude to mark places on a map. So it's just like graphing points on a graph. This has been your social studies break. Time to check and make sure you have all the parts of your graph. So you go title, title, label, label, units, units, numbers. So you go IV, DV, labels, units, and then make sure your numbers are evenly spaced. Title, title, label, label, units, units, numbers.